From a man who isn't conservative so much as he's retrograde, this is the Daniel Natal Show. Unless you've been living under a rock, you knew that the Department of Justice just took the unprecedented step to raid a former president's residence. To many, this intimidation tactic underscored just how corrupt and politicized the FBI has become, or the federal government in general, with their recent Nixonian weaponization of the IRS. If you've been following my reporting, you know that I've been talking about historical parallels to this kind of corruption and how it happened in the past, like how in the 1790s, the pro-British Federalist Party weaponized the government to go after Thomas Jefferson's Republican Party. It was an eerie foreshadowing of the Patriot Act, just as that 21st century piece of legislation pretended to be about Muslim jihadis and ended up being used to frame Republicans as domestic terrorists. This happened before in 1798, except with the legislation supposedly being about French spies. In the end, not one French spy was arrested or deported, but tons of Republicans were thrown in jail. One of the charges they used was spreading disinformation. Sound familiar? Well, in the end, the Alien and Sedition Act was repealed, and it was recorded as a dark period in our history that we overcame. A time when one political party used the government to criminalize the rival political party through false pretenses. Well, how was it overcome? What was the strategy that Thomas Jefferson used to beat it? In the book, What Kind of Nation by James Simon, he gives us an insight.
In his private correspondence, Jefferson revealed the passion and idealism of a purist who would selflessly defend his political principles without compromise. But as the leader of the Republicans, and his party's almost certain candidate for president in the election of 1800, he was also thinking in strategic terms. If the Federalist Sedition Act prosecutions of Republican critics of the Adams administration proceeded unchallenged, no effective Republican campaign could be mounted to defeat Adams in 1800. The law, therefore, must be openly attacked. In considering the mode of attack, Jefferson faced a difficult and dangerous dilemma. If the Vice President of the United States publicly condemned the legislation as unconstitutional, the Federalists might well train their prosecutorial sights on him. Federalist prosecutors could argue that a vice president who attacked duly enacted legislation as unconstitutional was guilty of malicious and false accusations against the government, which were prohibited by the Sedition Act. But the threat of prosecution, not to mention the vice president's possible impeachment, was not necessarily the worst outcome. For Jefferson and other Republican leaders to do nothing and allow the Federalists to wreak political havoc with the Sedition Act would mean the party's certain defeat in 1800, and its possible extinction. With his ally Madison, Jefferson developed a Republican strategy. As a rule, the two men wrote each other several times a month when both were in Virginia, as they were in the late summer and fall of 1798. Between July 21st and October 26, however, not a single letter was exchanged between them, possibly reflecting their growing suspicion that the privacy of the letters was not protected by federal postal officials. It was during this time that Jefferson drafted resolutions boldly claiming the constitutional authority of the individual states to declare the Alien and Sedition Acts not only unconstitutional, but null and void.
So what Jefferson did was bypass the feds altogether. He wanted the states to rein them in. He appealed to a parallel power structure to get things done. Our Constitution had two methods by which the states were supposed to provide a check on the federal layer of government. Both have since been shut off. The Senate was supposed to be the states having a say on the federal level, but as John F. Kennedy said in Profiles in Courage, before the Civil War, the Senate was filled with philosophers and statesmen. After the Civil War, they were no longer the senator from Georgia or New York or Vermont, but rather the senator from big oil or the railroad trusts or the banking industry. This decoupling of the Senate from the states was complete with the 17th Amendment. Instead of the state legislatures installing a senator, they made senators be popularly elected. What this essentially meant was that senators were no longer above politics now like a Supreme Court justice, but now needed money for campaigns. Where would that money come from? The oligarchs. So now they were beholden to the financial class and corporations for donations, and not beholden to their states. A second check that the Constitution gave the states was the Electoral College. Just as with senators, it was the state legislatures who were supposed to pick our presidents, not political parties. All a political party is a shell company for billionaire oligarchs. They get to choose the candidates now. In our original constitutional setup, it was the state legislatures who picked the candidates, not the political parties. Today, the political parties choose the slate of candidates months before the Electoral College, and the Electoral College is just supposed to put a rubber stamp on it. Before 1824, this was not the case. Historian Charles Beard, a man to the left, talks about the power shift here. He sells it as if it's a good thing that the states lost their power and their check on federal government.
Popular election of presidential electors. In a short time, the spirit of democracy, while playing havoc with the old order in state government, made its way upward into the federal system. The framers of the Constitution, bewildered by many proposals and unable to agree on any single plan, had committed the choice of presidential electors to the discretion of the state legislatures. The legislatures, in turn, greedy of power, early adopted the practice of choosing the electors themselves. But they did not enjoy it long undisturbed. Democracy, thundering at their doors, demanded that they surrender the privilege to the people. Reluctantly they yielded, sometimes granting popular election and then withdrawing it. The drift was inevitable, and the climax came with the advent of Jacksonian democracy. In 1824, Vermont, New York, Delaware, South Carolina, Georgia, and Louisiana, though some had experimented with popular election, still left the choice of electors with the legislature. 8 years later, South Carolina alone held to the old practice. Popular election had become the final word. The fanciful idea of an electoral college of, quote, good and wise men, end quote, selected without passion or partnership by state legislatures acting as deliberative bodies, was exploded for all time. The election of the nation's chief magistrate was committed to the tempestuous methods of democracy.
So under our Constitution, the states had checks and balances over the feds. They could rein them in. Originally, it was the states who picked our presidents, and it was the states who had a say in Senate. Little by little, those checks and balances were removed. Now the states, in a country called the United States of America, have no power. The political left wants to get rid of the Electoral College because theoretically, the states could use it to take back a lot of the power they previously ceded. If we actually return to the Constitution as written, the states could put the brakes on a lot of the corruption we're now seeing on the federal level. But that would require them creating a parallel structure, like a sort of new Senate outside of the federal layer. A meme from the bad guys is going around now that says, "Did you know that the second option of Article 5 in the Constitution allows the states to supersede the authority of the U.S. Congress? It was included in case Congress became corrupt. It's time to use it." Unfortunately, there are con men who want to use Article 5 to change the Constitution. They already have a pre-written Constitution in the wings to slip in and steal the rest of our diminishing freedoms. What I'm suggesting is not that. Not a convention to change the Constitution, but the states coming together to enforce it as written. But this, as I said, would require the states to assert their power, to band together and resist the feds like they did under Thomas Jefferson's strategy, a strategy that worked, by the way. Constitutional scholar Jonathan Turley recently made the news by proposing a new red state alliance against blue state boycotts. Is a red state alliance a step in the right direction? If so, then an appeal might be made to those 17 states who sued regarding the 2020 election, and from there, building outward. But first, a parallel structure has to be established where the states get together, a possibility now denied them since they lost the Senate. Listen to a European lawyer talk about parallel structures possibly being the way forward here.
I don't know if you have it in South Africa, you've got in Australia, you've got in England, which is called a stand in the park. Like-minded people meet in their local park, because I think this kind of works at a local basis, and they find solutions to these potential issues, like the possible overnight hyperinflation where currency becomes worthless, the possibility that you're not allowed to enter shops or markets, so the possibility of either growing food or finding wholesale retailers that some people are conscious they can buy food and actually distribute it to local people who may be needing it. And so I think a parallel structure at this stage is the form of resistance that is more likely to lead to a positive outcome than a full-on let's go and in a way serve them, which is let's go and break a few windows of a few shops so that they're scared of us. No, they're not going to be scared of you if you do that. Actually, either you are completely organized at a level that you've got very big elements of society backing you, and that would probably be the police, the military, the judiciary, or you're just going to be ignored. So you might as well create an alternative system that is the foundation of what I see as being the future. Maybe not the short term, but the mid to long term future. I see it as one in which we do not believe the top-down centralized form of control, government and rule. Now, you may call it Facebook, you may call it European Union, you may call it CIA, you may call it Microsoft, you may call it any of these things. But I think I believe we will come to see these as become obsolete. And why they're obsolete is because what has happened and what is happening now is the swan song of that system.
After the Department of Justice raided Trump's home at Mar-a-Lago, after they began using the Patriot Act to label political opponents as domestic terrorists in the January 6 hearings, after they initiated the tactic of imposing censorship under the guise of protecting us from disinformation, as they did in the Alien and Sedition Act, or weaponizing the IRS, it may be time to break the glass, pull the emergency switch, and allow the states to step up to the plate and be the adults in the room. The Constitution gives them that mechanism. Remember the name of our country, the United States of America. The John Birch Society provides a national program designed to counter the big government agenda and to restore our rights. Standing for constitutional freedoms for more than 60 years, the John Birch Society has been the force that protects and restores American liberty and independence. Check them out at jbs.org.